This is chapter 13 of The Wrong 10 Seconds. We've just seen Phoebe hand over her video of Charlie's dog theft to Shiana's family. Now we go to Charlie for what happens next. Chapter 13, Charlie, Monday afternoon. Fairford's monthly inventory had Charlie counting all day. First toiletries, then alcohol, and now, heavily gloved, he'd moved on to the freezers with Manesh. Olivia refused to help because her hands would get too cold. "You might find it a nice escape from the heat," Charlie suggested. She flounced off to man the tills. "It don't matter, 'cause I'll be a deputy soon, and they don't have to count. They do stuff with that little machine thingy instead." Leaning into the lamb chop compartment, Manesh observed, "She certainly seems knowledgeable on the matter." "Heavens preserve us," Charlie agreed. "With that lot in charge, they're as useful as the leading politicians." Olivia had a point, though. The higher-ups merely inputted totals the underlings scribbled on scraps of paper for each item. This afternoon, Charlie and Manesh apparently weren't counting fast enough, so Chris and Ben had retired to the office while they waited. Charlie drove his freshly tallied bags of frozen paella over the ledge of the open freezer door and into the compartment below. Grainy white clumps of frost hung from the freezer walls like oversized barnacles. The unit hummed urgently, striving to maintain cold temperatures. Families plowed through the aisles, mothers suffering from spending days with their children while school was out, wearily negotiating shopping carts full of ice lollies and snack-sized fruit around cases of products displaced for inventory. In welcome contrast, Charlie's favorite little family skipped in. The boy and girl who loved the alphabet game leaped over the packets partially blocking the aisle. "See any letters you might need on those packs?" Charlie asked. "It's our X." The boy pointed at the bags of mixed vegetables. "We do need that one. How did you guess?" The mother laughed. "I think Charlie knows all kinds of things." Charlie lifted out trays of frozen chicken coated with shimmering frost. In the Vermont house where he grew up, all creaky floorboards and flaking paint, frost invaded the inner window panes in winter. Enormous icicles drooped from the roof, sparse foam insulation tufting through cracks in the wooden plank walls. His mother would shout to the little ones not to pick it apart. "You know," Charlie told Manesh, "where I'm from in the States, it was as cold outside as these freezers for several months of the year." "What about the summers?" "Oh, this sort of heat wave would be standard for us, although we had plenty of rivers and lakes to jump into and cool off." Elbow deep in sacks of crinkle-cut carrots, Manesh said, "I think the temperatures would have to rise hellishly for me to consider jumping in the canals here. They've seen better days." "Indeed." The river at the transatlantic was pleasant, though. On that warm day 3 years back, when Harriet had her stroke, Charlie had been sure she'd run off to paddle there as he served the lunchtime rush on his own. A pack of secondary schoolers jostled down the aisle, knocking into Charlie, arguing about who would pay for the chewy sweets and energy drinks. The horrid blonde girl had never returned, probably busy with her publicity campaign. Charlie tumbled the chicken packs into the freezer and started sifting through steaks. I wonder when Wollaston's better days truly were. Even while the mills were going, how well did most people live? That's because, by definition, one person can't get ahead without someone else falling behind. Manesh's gently accented maxim echoed from the frozen chamber. "So you don't believe we can climb the economic ladder without stepping on anyone?" Charlie couldn't prove him wrong. He and Harriet had done all right, after a while at least. But they'd started with the trust fund from her father, the colonel who died when she was a toddler. For several years, the numbers fell short, and they had to buy cheap ingredients and get the kids' school uniforms from Primark when they couldn't find any second-hand. With these acts of self-preservation, they must have stepped on local businesses and exploited sweatshop workers. In such a crowded world, maybe it was impossible to avoid crushing somebody. "Excuse me," a well-tailored woman addressed him, her voice only a couple degrees warmer than the freezer units. "Are you nearly finished, or shall the meats be unavailable for the duration?" Charlie moved aside. "I beg your pardon." She snatched a steak and hurried away, with the appearance of someone who never glanced behind while elbowing to the front of life's queue. Maybe we're doing something noble by sacrificing our ambitions and accepting these 0-hour contracts, Charlie remarked to Manesh. Charlie, Ben called from the warehouse entrance. Need you in the back, now. In the drab office, Chris sat intent on his mobile. He looked up and nodded at Charlie's gloves. Trying not to leave fingerprints? Ben stood behind the wheeled desk chair, chest swollen and face flushed. Had a call from the police just now, Charlie. Charlie's stomach migrated to his throat. He stopped fumbling to remove his gloves. Chris's phone played a tinny whooshing sound. This video's all over the internet, Chris explained without raising his eyes again. Shows that dog getting chased away. A video? But how on earth and why? Really? It was you, Ben crowed. You stole that dog. I've never stolen anything. Charlie summoned some vigor back into his voice. Chris leapt up and waved his phone in Charlie's face. Charlie quailed back. It got recorded, arsehole. You, in your uniform, with your glasses. All right, all right. Ben put a hand on Chris's shoulder, basking in his own patience next to his impulsive younger colleague. You going to try and explain this? I didn't steal the dog. I never took it into my possession. I thought it needed freedom. What? You... Chris sputtered. How is that your call? Charlie adjusted his glasses, his gloves squeaking faintly against their rims. The girls who came in with the dog were so rude, I feared they were cruel to it. So you thought you'd be nice by chasing the dog with shopping trolleys? I wasn't thinking. I got quite upset. You were supposed to be so great at customer service, Ben added, still grinning. Such strong management material, and you lost it over a couple of little girls. That smile gave Charlie radiation sickness. Better if Ben got angry, like Chris, instead of pretending he was capable of taking a higher road. Every other time I provide impeccable service. I'm punctual, thorough, and you're an animal abuser, Chris shouted. Sweat prickled Charlie's forehead. I'm not. I've never hurt an animal, not anyone. Chris slammed his chair against the wall. You acted like you didn't know anything about it. If you cared about the dog, you would have said something. It was a fair point. I meant to. Why hadn't he told the truth to someone sensible like Inspector Ian Riddle? Charlie's memory stalled, overheated in a fireball of shame. Ben beamed. Charlie, I'm terminating your contract. I'll walk you out. I don't want you speaking to anyone. I'll send someone later to pick up the uniform. He edged Charlie out of the office. Oh, and I'll let the police know we found the culprit. They'll want to talk to you. Charlie kept pace with Ben despite his stiff knees' objections. He couldn't bear to look at Manesh, still bent over the freezers, or the trio of old ladies speculating over whether to buy their eggs free range. As the automatic doors opened before him one last time, the flower bouquets caught his eye, mums and carnations, crammed and wilting. He barely registered the drive home. Somehow he managed not to mow anyone down with the van, not to wreak more destruction than he already had. He found himself outside his front door in glaring sunlight, bees buzzing around the buddleia. And soon, surely, a spotlight would glare on him too, and rumors would hum. He must appear to his supervisors, his former supervisors, as a failed businessman, a slave driver who'd reduced his wife to a shell. Not a stretch, then, for them to see him as an animal abuser. Charlie slipped inside. In the bedroom, Harriet's bed was not yet remade. The washing machine whirled last night's sheets, its motor the undercurrent beneath the telly in the lounge and the faint beeps of a phone. Mrs. iPhone was on duty, her thumb zipping over the phone's keypad. Harriet dozed at the kitchen table, turned slightly away so she could take in the delights of daytime television. Lunchtime soup still circled her mouth. Finished work already? Mrs. iPhone asked with the brightness of someone caught at inadequacy. Yes, Charlie switched doctors off. Freshly fired, he'd lost the right to rebuke Mrs. iPhone for her neglect. He loped to Harriet under the carer's gaze. The navy blue Fairford's uniform weighted him down, not only because of the humidity, but because it didn't belong to him anymore. What must the other staff think? This very minute, Ben would be rocking on his toes, boasting about how he'd cracked the case to reveal what a villain Charlie was. Harriet had pulled back into the world now the inane Telly had left it. She let Charlie wipe her mouth, her eyes guilty that he had to do it when it wasn't his job. Well, it was his only job now. "You can go early," Charlie told Mrs. iPhone without turning toward her. She didn't move, stiff as a boulder behind him, emanating a chill like those icy barnacles in the freezer. "Not being funny, but can I ask you why Fairford's let you go home early?" "I was done." "They investigating that dog thief? 'Cause that new video looked like one of their staff." "I imagine they are. I just felt under the weather," Charlie snapped. He began filling the sink for the washing up. "But I can cope here. It's fine." She rose to her feet, glaring. "I'll definitely be on my way then." The door shut heavily behind her, and Charlie gave up on the washing. He sat next to Harriet, sanitizing his hands. Her apprehension spiked through his haze. "It's fine," he said. "Fairford's wasn't a great place to work, and I have a lot of experience. I'll find something else, someplace that gives real contracts." But he was in his 50s. Jobs were scarce. Ben had said something about the police, too. Would Charlie have a criminal record? There were no words that could pass on to Harriet the terrible shame Ben and Chris had impressed on him. Thank God she didn't know. But wouldn't it be easier if she did? Working side by side for so many years, she always knew when he'd offended a customer or made a costly mistake, and he didn't have to confess. He used to resent her awareness on occasion. How petty, how shallow. He'd been spoilt, never needing to explain himself. And he'd been spared acknowledging his own cowardice until this moment when he couldn't meet her eyes or tell her even half the story. Charlie returned to the sink. "You know, this is actually great timing. With the fete coming up, I can really make it special. Sausage rolls, quiches, cheese straws, all from scratch." She grunted indignantly as he fled eye contact, denying her only means of communication. The phone rang. Lydia. Charlie recognized the number from the display. He ignored it and turned the tap on full blast. That's the end of chapter 13. I've got chapter 14 up for you as well. Thanks.